The free practice 1 and 2 tests in Hungary have concluded, and in today's video, we will examine the race pace of various teams, starting with Ferrari, which brought the new rear suspension to Belgium. We've said this multiple times. Hungary is the real testing ground to officially see how the Ferrari SF25 performs, as well as the behavior of the new rear suspension brought to Belgium, combined with the new floor introduced in Austria. So, let's look at everything in detail. I will review the race pace. We'll also watch the onboard footage of Hamilton and Leclerc to see how this Ferrari performs. Before we begin, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss any videos here on the channel, where we analyze each session in detail. With that said, let's start by looking at the times from Free Practice 2, and then we'll do an analysis together. So, Free Practice 2, let's see Norris in first position, second Piastri, third Leclerc, fourth Stroll, fifth Alonso, sixth Hamilton, seventh Russell, and all the others follow. It's strange to see an Aston Martin so ahead. On a single lap, Aston Martin was very strong. Aston Martin is somewhat the surprise of the day, among others, and it's important to note third Leclerc and sixth Hamilton. One thing that immediately stands out in the classification is that the first Red Bull is Tsunoda in 9th position, and surprisingly, we have a satellite team, Racing Bulls, which is ahead of the official Red Bull team with a jar in 8th position, while Verstappen is in 14th place. Verstappen struggled a lot on a single lap and also in race pace. But before analyzing the race pace in detail, I want to show you Leclerc's onboard first to demonstrate how the SF25 behaves, especially in the driven part at the end of the first sector and the beginning of the second sector. Let's look together here at Leclerc, going towards turn 4, a very difficult corner where he struggled a bit more this morning in FP1. Let's see how the SF25 performs here, because it's a corner where confidence is crucial, especially with the rear, to avoid losing control of the single-seater. You see that he arrives slightly wide. He doesn't have the same confidence as McLaren with the rear, and this remains a bit of a limit for Ferrari, although I must say that in terms of on-track behavior, it has significantly improved, especially in managing the rear overheating, which has greatly improved compared to what we've seen in the past. Here we see curve 5 instead with Leclerc, who takes this approach of immediately seeking the apex at the start of the turn and then widening the trajectory towards the end. Unlike Hamilton, who takes a slightly wider line and then tightens towards the final part by accelerating more, causing the rear to rotate more. Leclerc has a more oversteering style, so he looks for the apex early on, while Hamilton does the opposite. Let me show you again the point where Leclerc arrives so close here and how much steering angle Leclerc has at this moment with soft tires. Now, instead, Hamilton, especially in the last 2 turns, turn 13 and turn 14, enters less tight than Leclerc and tries to rotate the rear more, while Leclerc rotates the front more and then manages the rear on exit. This is to show you the onboard of Leclerc. They also made several changes at Ferrari. In fact, now I will first show you this very interesting graphic of FP1, comparing Leclerc and Hamilton with telemetry. Let's see where Leclerc gains the most. Leclerc is in red, Hamilton in yellow. We see that throughout the lap, Leclerc gains only a few milliseconds in each corner, especially in the chicane, which is the point where he gained the most this morning in F+1. And, well, you can also see from the layout at the bottom of the track how much Leclerc gains over Hamilton. Hamilton only gains in the last corner. And this is because Hamilton isn't feeling comfortable with the car, and in fact, we see 2 different faces of Ferrari. On one side, we have Leclerc, who is more comfortable with the setup, as also shown by his race pace. They made several adjustments, but he started with a slightly lighter setup than in FP1, and then, he felt comfortable, increasing a bit the front wing incidence, which Leclerc often does as a routine change during free practice. And instead, Hamilton did a sort of opposite test, meaning he started with a more loaded wing and then went to unload it following Leclerc's direction. So, a different behavior between the 2 Ferrari drivers. I'll also show the image comparing the 2 wings so we can compare them together. Let's look at the wing, the one chosen on one side, the one Hamilton chose with the Monaco configuration, which is a much more loaded wing. And on the other side, the one Leclerc chose, which is a less loaded setup, like the one from Spain. So, configuration 4, specifically 4 for Leclerc instead of 5 for Hamilton, so 5 out of 5 for Hamilton, really very charged, and in fact afterwards, he went to unload it for free practice too. Let's also look at this revealing image of Hamilton who, in the end, finished his race pace in FP2 and went to shake his head. Look here how he shakes his head. Hamilton is not happy. The balance of the single-seater is off, and he even said that it's almost a dangerous balance. So, very strong words from Hamilton, who also said this morning that the car is not good, I don't feel comfortable, while on the other hand, Leclerc is finding himself better with the single-seater. I'll also show you here a comparison of the rear wing seen on board, that is, from outside, but with the cars on track, and we see Leclerc's rear wing with medium-high load, while Hamilton's has a high load. Now, to try to get more grip at the rear, to have a little more load for Hamilton, but in the end, it didn't really change much, meaning Hamilton still isn't comfortable with the rear. So they even reduced the load on Hamilton's car by switching to Leclerc's setup, which currently, if we want, is the one that can actually push the SF25 to the limit. Let's also look at the lap times. Now let's analyze the race pace together because there are many interesting things to see, starting from the classification, which shows the times of Leclerc and Hamilton, as seen here on the right side of the screen. Let's look at Leclerc's race pace with the medium tire, starting from this lap, which is the lap he pitted on. Then he started with a 1.25, a somewhat slow lap, 1.2, 1.6, 1.2, 1.8, January 21st, 92, a slow lap at 30, then 123 and one fairly slow lap, but not that much. 12242, so the race pace, let's say he was running around the high 21s, started, and then went down to the low 22s. If we look at Norris instead, he did a race with medium tires, disregarding this lap during the pit stop, so he started with a 21, then 21.1, 21.2, 22.2, 22.3, 22.4, 22.6, 21.5, so a much higher pace, averaging about 0.6 faster per lap, indicating that McLaren currently has more pace than Ferrari. This is very clear. You can also see it clearly from the race pace, with Norris averaging around a low 21. And he did a high 22.6, but I think that was due to a mistake, whereas Leclerc maintained a high 21 race pace and was running in the low 22s, even touching a 23 as his best time. Hamilton, on the other hand, with soft tires, did a race pace starting from this lap of the comeback, so 121.5, 31.7, which is very high here, probably due to traffic. 21.2, 9, 252, very high. 21.9, 22.5, 22.7, 22.9. You can understand that these are very fluctuating times, moreover with a softer tire advantage for Hamilton and a disadvantage for Leclerc. Anyway, Hamilton struggled more with his race pace, doing about 8 to 9 laps of race pace simulation, but the rhythm is higher, and if we compare it to a Jar's race pace, which is very similar to Verstappen's. Let's start with the comeback lap. Here he did 8 minutes, so 12:37, 122, 72, 3, 22, 3, 269. A somewhat slow lap, 22.3, 22.3, 226, 230. So he was running in the low 22s, then after a few laps, he also did some laps in the high 22s. If we look at Verstappen, who was feeling very unwell with the car, he did 224,220,267.24 E5, 226,227,220, 322.6. So a race pace. Then as he progressed, 24 E6, 234, 23 E2, 226. In short, he didn't feel comfortable. The race pace was inconsistent, but 2 race laps between Jari and Verstappen are similar. In fact, he has already also been faster on average. Of course, this is Friday's data. Ovo! We know that even Red Bull always goes to modify the setup, and often on Friday they don't find the best feeling with the car's setups. They intervened on the T-Bear, on the front wheel convergence, the height of the floor, the front part of Verstappen to change the setup and try to find more feeling with the front, because we know that if Verstappen doesn't have feeling with the front, he can't drive his car. As he also said in the team radio, I'll quote his words, he said, "It feels like driving on ice. I can't find the feeling." It was already the best, huh? The car in the Red Bull family, if we want to say, between Red Bull and Racing Bulls, and the race pace also proves it. That said, Red Bull, especially on Saturday, always makes a step forward compared to Friday, so I expect Verstappen to make that step forward also for tomorrow. Going back to the race laps, another very interesting race lap is Antonelli's, which, if we look at the comeback lap, he did 2:1:23, 21.7, 2:20, 2:18, 2:19, 2:60, 2:24, 2:25, 2:27, 2:28, which is a slightly slower race pace than Leclerc, but still very fast, faster than Ajar, and even faster than Verstappen. At this moment, Antonelli's race pace is better than Russell's when we compare it to what Russell has done. 2:19, 2:19, 20, 2:59, 22. In short, Antonelli is currently faster than Russell in race pace. Russell also didn't quite find his rhythm today, let's say. Let's also look at the times, but Antonelli is still ahead in qualifying pace, so Russell is slightly better in qualifying, by almost a tenth. In the race pace, Antonelli seems to be better positioned than Russell, and it's not the first time that Antonelli performs better in race pace than in qualifying simulations. I also report Alonso's time, which, if we consider it a good long run, is quite decent, especially considering it's an Aston Martin 2:14, 2:21, 2:21, 224, obviously slower than Hamilton when compared with Gomoft, and it's a very slow race pace, just a few laps simulation, 5-6 laps, so it doesn't count for much. I mentioned it because Aston Martin didn't do badly either. 4th with Stroll and 5th with Alonso, who only did FP2 because in FP1 he was driven by Drugovich. Let's also compare Norris and Piastri. I'll put them side by side so we can see them clearly together. Starting with Piastri, let's start with Norris first. If I repeat his times, 21.3, 2:12, 22, 23.4, 22.6, 21.5, 27, and 7, then slower. Let's go see Piastri, 21.8, 2:24, 21 E6, 2:24, 24 E7, 21 E5, 25 E5, 21.8, 22.6. So it seems more consistent at the moment. Piastri and Norris seem to be faster in terms of times, but less consistent. Obviously, we need to see that Norris also made a few more mistakes compared to Piastri. Piastri always starts a bit like a diesel, a bit slower, let's say, and then reaches Norris's performance and even surpasses him from Saturday onwards. Norris does the opposite, starting immediately explosive, very strong right away, and then he can't improve anymore. In fact, he begins to make some mistakes. So it will be interesting to see the challenge within McLaren as well. But if I have to give a current assessment, having watched the free practice sessions and considered all the factors, I believe we are currently seeing a McLaren above all. So we have Ferrari. In this case, I am showing you an image of Hamilton's garage when they implemented Leclerc's specification on Hamilton's rear wing. So we have a McLaren immediately in front of everyone, then Ferrari, and be careful because the battle behind is intense because Mercedes is in the mix, and Aston Martin is also in qualifying, although they probably also went a bit on engine power, so we can also place them a bit further back. However, Red Bull is currently in a crisis, so they might play a role in the positions behind Ferrari. Both Mercedes and Red Bull, as well as Racing Point with Ajar, could be contenders. So this is the kind of pack behind. Also, of course, watch out for Red Bull, which with Vesta is expected to make a step forward, but behind it's a bit more uncertain who might perform better. He was already going very strong. Verstappen was a bit more struggling. But when Verstappen is in trouble, it still didn't do that badly despite being completely in crisis. So if it improves, it can do much better. Aston Martin has gained a bit of engine power, so I wouldn't consider it. And Mercedes looks better to me. And at the moment, no, Mercedes could also perform well in qualifying and the race. Also, keep an eye on tire wear, which is always their Achilles heel. I also want to give a brief recap on Mercedes because we said Mercedes took a step back, meaning they started with the new suspension. With the new rear suspension that they brought to Canada, which was suited for a track layout with many straight line accelerations. They took a step back by reinstalling the old suspension, the one we had changed in previous races, if I'm not mistaken, from Monaco to Imola. I don't remember when they last used it with the specific rear suspension. They restarted from there, so they took a step back because the new specification, the one introduced in Canada with the rear suspension, did not give the expected feedback during acceleration out of corners with the steering wheel turned. It was fine during straight line acceleration, but it didn't provide the right feeling to the drivers when accelerating out of corners where managing the throttle was necessary. The brake in progress. That was kind of the problem. I hope I explained myself, but anyway, it was a Mercedes issue that they will now try to resolve by starting from scratch, if you will. Restarting without that update and rebuilding with a more solid car that provides more positive feedback between simulation and track. So this is a bit of Mercedes' point. That said, I'll also show you some other images. This is the upgrade we saw on Red Bull, on the front part of the nose, on Noda during FP1, and on Verstappen during FP1. Front modification on the nose, a small change also on the wing flap, a bit more angle of attack on Verstappen compared to Tsunoda, who has less angle of attack on the front wing. Nothing major, just minimal updates from Red Bull, and I'll also show you telemetry differences here in FP+1 between Leclerc, McLaren, and Verstappen. Let's see. So Norris, Leclerc, and Verstappen. Here is the chicane. You see that Leclerc enters the corner more slowly. Sorry. Here at turn 4. Sorry. Here at turn 4. You see that Leclerc enters more slowly compared to both Norris and Verstappen. There is a bit less confidence in Leclerc's case, who then improved in FP2, and here at the same turn 5, the same thing happens, but also Verstappen in this case was struggling more, and as we move forward, the same thing can be seen at chicane here, especially at the last corner. Let's watch it. The tire of Verstappen overheats too much, and he can't manage the tire well in the final part of the lap. In this case, however, Leclerc's tire temperature management was not bad at all, and this is worth noting because Ferrari has improved their tire thermal management, which was an area where they struggled a bit more. So, overall, we've seen everything. The very last thing I wanted to show you is Verstappen throwing. Let's say, a towel, I don't know what it was, this object that entered the cockpit. He threw the towel out of the cockpit, and therefore an investigation was launched, and an inquiry is ongoing. So we will see what the FIA's response will be, whether there will be a fine or even a more severe sanction. And so, that's the very last thing. This is Hamilton's comment on the long run. The rear is very unstable. Well, Hamilton is not comfortable with this SF25 because of an unstable rear. We've said it multiple times. The same problem since the beginning of the season. When they set up Leclerc's car, the rear becomes unstable, and it's not the car Hamilton wants to drive, so that's a bit of the issue. This is the middle step we also analyzed earlier. Norris with medium tires 21.2. Piastri 21.6 with medium tires, but more laps on the tires. Antonelli 21.7 very good with medium tire. Hamilton soft tire 21.5, but obviously a different compound. Russell 21.9, so slightly slower pace, as I mentioned earlier. That's all, guys, and my prediction for the qualifying is that I think Paul Norris Piastri will do well, then I say Leclerc third. This is my top 3. Let me know yours in the comments. I'm curious to read and respond to everyone. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos here on the channel. That's all. See you in the next video.